Welcome to the Next Human. My name's Arav, and today I'm joined by Ethan Wang, a JD candidate at Yale Law. Thank you so much for being here today, Ethan. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, yeah, the first thing I want to get us started off with is if you just kind of like walk me through your, life's journey, kind of, like where you grew up, where you studied, and where you are now.
Sure, sure. Um, I guess I was born and grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Um, kind of yeah, so I guess um I guess probably what I would say is uh I guess I started off I guess I'll start the story maybe in high school because I feel like
Mm,
in middle school maybe it was like I was still obviously like pretty young, figuring out my interests. I feel like in high school is when I started to kind of um like develop a more solid idea of what the kinds of things I was interested in, and like more solid sense also just of like kind of who I was as a person, who I wanted to be as a person.
mm,
And then like sort of from there kind of, walked the line
yeah.
until which is not honestly not a very long line. I wasn't in high school that long ago. But I guess in high school, a couple of things that I think I engaged in was or like one very sort of um, important experience I think that I had was I got to work with this um, like cancer diagnostics startup.
Nice.
Now they're doing like really great work, and it's like a kind of a big company now. But at the time, it was only like a few people, and I kind of went into it because I'd done research in high school a little bit as well, in like a protein research lab, and
Mm,
I wasn't really fully sure about research, to be honest. Because as a high schooler, you don't really know much, and so you're kind of in there like doing your thing.
yeah.
And then I guess you don't really, yeah, it's not something where you're um able to contribute that meaningfully. But I felt like at this place, I was actually able to do some really, really cool work, and sort of see both because when you're doing like really basic research and when you don't know that much, it's kind of hard to see what your like research is actually going to end up as, and
Mhm.
so or end up kind of how it's going to impact like actual people in the future. But I think working at this startup, it was like really meaningful because I sort of knew what the actual end goal was of all the research that we were doing and all of the other work, and it was just great because the team was like super tight knit and everything. And I think that I was also just really passionate about the field of like cancer research, cancer diagnostic stuff. I've had like family members who've been impacted by it, as I'm sure like many people have.
Mm,
And it was just something where I was like, well, like I like biology class, I like science classes, but I also want to see like how the stuff that you're learning in the classroom extends beyond and actually is put into practice in the real world. Because kind of I feel like it's often like said in the classroom, like, oh, science is like an important driver of like societal change and whatever. And it's not always that clear, to be honest,
mm,
how that's true from, like your like very basic like cell biology stuff or, your like chemistry reactions and whatnot. It's like, and so it's useful. I thought it was really useful to see how like science would work in the real world. So I think I went with that. That was sort of like my like mindset going into like college was like, wow, like science is a really cool like tool that society for society to kind of advance its knowledge, both like on the basic level of like, oh, how can we understand this, but also on the applied level, which was what I was interested in, and why I ultimately majored in bioengineering, which is just, how do we kind of use the scientific knowledge and translate it into something that like people are really able to use, whether it's like for like the cancer diagnostics thing, or if it's like a product or something like that. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of how I went into college. I went to Harvard College for my undergrad, was part of the bioengineering program. I went in knowing I wanted to do bioengineering, and took like sort of the intro bioengineering class my freshman fall, and really thought it was like a really cool field because one thing I think bioengineering is a relatively new field,
mm,
and it combines a lot of other fields together. It really is like kind of you can make of it what you can explore the things that you really want to explore and still be within the sort of like the guardrails um of I guess bioengineering still.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I went through that. I got involved in some research. I did a little. I also got involved in this like medical devices startup too, for a little bit, like in the like kind of through this like years of college. I did some like a really big part of it was also, or of like my experience, I think was I was part of the EMT program at Harvard, Crimson EMS. It was like the undergrad sort of like um, uh, collegiate emergency medical services team. I got certified as an EMT and like worked with the team on like staffing events and whatnot. And I thought that also just gave this really, it kind of like went into this whole like philosophy of like, um, like there's this like science and there's knowledge and I want to use it, for something. And, like I obviously, people in like the other sort of like community organization stuff do really important work. But for me, it was like, I want to like learn this stuff and like be able to use this like knowledge and like leverage it for something like so we learn like for the EMT class like anatomy, like basic anatomy, physiology stuff, like basic like medical like conditions, diagnostics, stuff like that. And so I just thought it was like, wow, like now I can take this knowledge, go into the field and do like a medical exam, even though obviously it's not like a, you're not like a doctor or anything, but it's like still it's like, wow, like I can't believe undergrads after like a few months of training can go out and just assess patients. And so that's again like kind of the mindset I took into a lot of things. And I think that towards the end, of sort of the college experience, I got involved in some really cool research, cardiac tissue engineering research. And it was really through a class, but I thought this was like another class that I thought, instead of like a lot of like sort of homework and tests in like the typical engineering class, it was a lab class where you gotta like make things with cells, like actual cells. And it was like probably the most time intensive class I took at Harvard. There were weeks where it was like 30 hours in the lab for this one class. And so I think, but I was like, the professor was great. He was, I think somebody who ended up being like a really important mentor to me for sure. And like somebody I definitely look up to still to this day. And I think that I got involved in that kind of research, like in his lab, in large part because of this class, and really glad that I did that. And yeah, I think that like a big emphasis in like a bioengineering lab is like how do you find like how this might be useful to researchers in the future, how to like societal interests in the future. And so I think that's one component of like my like that's like one thread I guess that I can draw, is like through the story is like I just really liked using knowledge and then like actually like applying it to things that I could like feel are like, oh, like I can help you, this is like something that like I can actually use. And I think that the other component of it, and this actually kind of I feel like expanded into other things. Like I got involved in like a police research sort of team at Harvard as well. Also through this like bioengineering professor, and I thought that was a really great experience too because it was like as engineers you're trained to do quantitative analysis and do all these sort of like work with numbers, like be able to code, statistical analysis, things like that. And then to be able to apply it to a community in crisis, who would like try to kind of institute this like new policing scheme and like take a look at like, oh, like what are these indicators of like crime, community health, things like that. It was just like a really novel and inspiring way kind of to use a lot of these engineering skill sets. And it again appealed to my like I have like these hard skills that I can use for like this community and like draw some conclusions and present to the police force. um and I think yeah, so that was a big thing. And I think that like um uh and yeah, so I guess, and then eventually it got to sort of close to the end of my like undergrad time. And I think that the decision to go to law school was one where I felt that um, I knew that I wasn't really convinced that I really wanted to have like a research career, I guess, because I'd done research, did like a thesis and everything.
Mhm.
And because I feel like to do research, candidly, like you have to be really, really interested in these like research questions in your field. and you have to be willing to spend just like hundreds and hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, really. Well, actually, probably tens. It probably accumulatively ends up being like tens, probably tens of thousands of hours. Um, by the end of the PhD, it's like to research these questions, and you're just like so like passionate about it. And I don't think I was ever to the degree of like I care so much about like answering these questions. I think that I liked research, but it wasn't like I don't want to do a PhD. And I think um also something, I mean, like med school is also another thing that sort of came out naturally, especially as a EMT. A lot of the people in the EMT program go on to become doctors or do like a medical degree. And it's like
Mhm.
I also just wasn't something that I was wondering was like I felt like a lot of the cool work that I'd done in like the sort of the police research thing, I was like, well, I think there's a lot of really impactful and cool work in the like policy side and like in sort of the law and in like government and things like that. And in the medical field, I would just be another sort of guy with an engineering degree or by like a bioengineering STEM degree
Yeah.
going to med school. And I thought that like, there's probably like this, I feel like I'm pretty replaceable, and I feel like there's probably a lot of people like me, and I don't really know that like I really add any value to the like medical field at all. In that regard, if I were to try to pursue it. So for me, I was like, well, like there's not a ton of lawyers I thought who I mean there are like a lot of lawyers not I'm now finding but there's just not there wasn't around me that like pre-law people tended not to be like STEM people. And I was like, well, like maybe I have something to bring to the table from my background as like as a STEM person, as an engineer. And um and I think that like a lot of the legal issues were things that I care a lot about. I took a constitutional law class as an undergrad, kind of as an elective, and really, really loved it. It was just like, wow, like the way that lawyers think through these issues is so different than the way that people in like the New York Times or just like in op-eds or like, sitting at home are going to be answering these things or thinking about these things. It's a lot more about like what are the legal principles involved, like what are the like sort of fact like more rigorous like logical strands you can draw. And I just like thought that that was like a really cool way of discussing these ideas that didn't seem so like like charged. It was like like we're trying to find the right answer. We're not trying to or get close to like a right answer. And honestly, that kind of made that sort of like horseshoed back into the STEM, where it's like, oh well, like now we're going back to like instead of like, oh, what is morally right? It's like, what can I make the best argument for? What's like the sort of the best way that we can address certain issues in constitutional law. And I also took like a law class actually in my last semester, which was also like really interesting. And we had some really great discussions. This was like before the affirmative action decision came out. And I mean, we were at Harvard. And so luckily we got who was one of the SFFA via Harvard is one of the cases that got decided for the affirmative action stuff. And we had one of the trial attorneys come in from the like trial when it was still at the trial level, like one of the trial attorneys come in and talk to us about like how he sort of viewed the case. And so, yeah, I think that like the culmination of all these things just drew me to law. And that's where I am now. I'm 1L in the trenches, doing all these like, yeah, luckily applied and got admitted to Yale Law. And yeah, that's that's where I am now. That's where we are, fall of 2023, Thanksgiving weekend. Um, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I think you summed it up really, really well. I mean, like I'm right now like hoping to pursue, degree in bioengineering. Who knows if that's what I end up getting, but um I think, everything you just mentioned like is pretty much what's drawing me to the field. Just kind of the versatility of it and just how, look at you right after getting that in law school. So um yeah, that I guess is also just an inspiring story. Um,
I don't know if it's inspiring, but I think that it's
it's
something where
it's it's definitely, well, to me, it's cool to know that there's a lot of options involved with the bioengineering degree. So that is
yeah,
definitely
that's one of the things I think it's just like because honestly I didn't know like exactly what bioengineering was, but it just sounded like engineering, which I liked, and biology, which I liked. and just sort of like mash those together. And one of the great things is it's I guess it depends a little bit on the specific program, but I
Mhm.
feel like there's just so much leeway because it encapsulates like drug delivery, like pharmacology, like some basic like sort of drug development stuff, medical devices, sort of like the mechanical engineering stuff of like prosthetics and whatnot. And then there's like pacemakers and like the more like electrical engineering aspects of it. So it's just like such a broad ranging field. And you just end up getting a little taste of almost every like engineering discipline if that's sort of how you want to play it. But
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and just like more on like, your transition from bioengineering to law. I mean, like, I guess my question is like, how was that? I mean, like, did you find it, but was, hard, easy? Was it easier than expected, harder than expected, or and like, how is your, bioengineering degree kind of like the classes you took, and how is that kind of helping you now?
I will say, I think that transitioning from a STEM degree to the like law school is a tough transition for sure. At least for me, I think it's not. It's kind of tough going from years of doing like submitting like we call them problem sets, P sets, but like homework where you're submitting like code files and equations and like just kind of every week is like, oh, like let me do the set of problems, and to one where you're reading like tens and tens of pages per day of like pretty dense legal material. You have to like write, like you're expected to write, be able to like produce like a lot of writing in a little time that's like high quality. So I think that there's definitely difficulties with the transition that I think are like I guess just inherent in the switch from bioengineering to law. But I also think that there's advantages too in that I think that like engineering just gives you a different way of looking at like the thought process I think is a little bit different where I think for example for bioengineering engineering is like a lot of the times it's really about like I feel like I have this like kind of first principles approach or like a kind of like a um uh like that's well these two are different things. I'm not trying to like equate them, but like a first principle approach where like sometimes I'm like, well, this is like what the Constitution says, and this is like what makes sense, like given what these like the developments of the case law since then. And so like how can we kind of think about the development of law without kind of um like instead of thinking about what the outcome that we necessarily want, think about like what processes and what kinds of principles apply to the law and like kind of develop into what we have now and like how this might impact future decisions. I guess I'm not explaining it super well, but like I think that there's like definitely kind of a very procedural way of certain sort of looking at the law that might be a little bit different than maybe how people from other disciplines look at it.
Mhm.
Um, and I also think that like um, I mean, besides like the sort of mindset, sort of like the engineering mindset or the STEM mindset that you're applying to this, I think that also there's definitely a lot of areas of law that it's are interacting more and more with technology. For example, like antitrust law, intellectual property law is like a big one, but like there's like the new rise of like cyber crimes, which like I mean, I'm a bioengineer, so I didn't like study CS and stuff, but it's like, well, like I took a CS class. I know how to code. There's like some basics that I know, and it's like, and then there's like things involving like, like fraudulent drugs and stuff like that. And I think that in the like legal practice world, I think it just gives you a cool perspective on some of these issues where you're like, well, like, yeah, like I remember this class I took that touched on this like technology that is involved in this crime or in this like sort of case. And I think that's something that like you can't necessarily just like there's definitely a difference between having learned it for 4 years as an undergrad or whatever, having learned it before, and then being like, okay, like I gotta like teach myself how to like think about this like legal issue versus like not having any STEM background at all and trying to teach yourself, molecular biology or like um like the chemistry of some like drug or something like that.
Mhm.
So I think that there are definitely cool things about it. But I also like I definitely recognize like my reading comprehension and like writing ability um is probably like not as well developed, at least at this point. And I'm feeling it, in the class, in some of these classes, I'm just like, wow, how do you get through that reading so fast? I'm still here on like page 5 and you're like done. So yeah.
And I mean, I guess like right now, like 1L finals are coming up. I guess you're also, yeah, you're probably also like applying for like summer positions and stuff. You must be, this is probably one of the, like busiest times you'll have this year. So how's that going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think Thanksgiving break is so deceptive because I think like I came home for Thanksgiving break, St. Louis, and I um knew that I had all these things that I had to do, and I think that but part of me was like, it's like I decided to come home. I'm glad that I did. Spending time with family and like high school friends and catching up with people from from my hometown. But I do think that like there's definitely this kind of balancing act that was there in college, but I think in law school it really like amps up to where like you just have more work. There's more expected of you. There's less hand holding.
Mhm.
So like it's like sort of get your stuff done. That's your responsibility, and it's something I'm still acclimating to. But yeah, I think it is definitely like a busy time of the year. And yeah, that's well, I mean, that was what I was working on before this stuff was kind of more law school work, and I guess things are gonna really hit once we get back. But yeah, definitely busy,
Startup
busy.
fans, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, hopefully everything goes well. Fingers crossed. Um,
fingers crossed. Yes, thank you.
um, but yeah, I mean, so to not take any more of your time, I'll,
It's okay.
I'll just finish this off with the last question, which is, what's one piece of high school or what's one piece of advice you'd give to a high schooler who's um usually I'd say, hoping to get into your field, but I guess you can kind of speak on you know, two kind of different perspectives um
Sure.
as a law student and a bioengineering degree holder.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question because I've also like kind of sometimes I think about like sort of the stuff that I've done. I'm like, wow, I feel like I just sort of stumbled into each and every cool opportunity and just ended up meeting so many like great mentors and cool people along the way. Um, I think that something that I would say though is for high schoolers who are like applying to college or bioengineering or something, and then for like college students who might be applying to law school or like any grad school really,
Mhm.
I think something that's important is like um, kind of developing a sense of um, like getting involved, being active, I guess, about involving yourself in projects that you think are cool and that you feel passionate about. Um, I think that like it doesn't necessarily need to be something where like this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
Like as like as a high schooler, I was like, well, like I thought the startup work was really cool, and so I'm like, well, maybe I want to like do my own sort of like technology related startup. That's probably not. I mean, unless I'm involved in like a legal capacity, that might not happen in the future. But like, that didn't stop me from wanting to get involved with like bioengineering research, with like some like other sort of like startup things in college. And I think that like another thing was I was at some point interested in, like medicine. And so I was like, well, like I think that like a good way of trying to like dip my toes into medicine and like kind of also get into community service was to do the like EMT program. And I was like, well, like it ended up being a really, really amazing experience.
Something just happened. I don't know. I can't hear you anymore.
Okay,
Um,
okay, sorry.
okay,
Um,
good.
that I think brother got into his AirPods or something. But I think that like I almost didn't even get into the EMT program. I think I got off like off the alternate list or something. So it was like it's like this amazing experience that I think will like probably inform a lot of the way I look at like legal issues, a lot of the way I look at like health issues just generally, and like so much of like what I did, I think in undergrad, I spent like a lot of time like on CPR research, or not research, but CPR like education stuff on on like we end up doing this cool project in like gender equity
Mm.
in CPR education. And I think that like I just feel like at each step of the way, it was like I really enjoy doing the projects that I'm doing. I really like getting involved um in these like different things. And it wasn't always like, oh, I care so much about this like specific like I know like I didn't like it's hard to know before you actually get into the field that you really care about like this topic and you're really like into it. So sometimes it's like I like for example like the professor and like the tissue engineering research. I just really liked the professor and was like, this is somebody I want to work under.
Mm.
And then so I think that like the one thing I'd say to high schoolers or and I think advice that I still try to follow myself is just being active about like getting involved in things. And some things might will stick, some things will not stick. But either way, the only thing I guess you have to lose, especially like when you're in high school and it's just like um, like nobody expects you to commit to this thing forever. And so just like get involved in projects, like just be active about things like that. And I think it'll serve you well because like worst comes to worst, you'll realize you didn't really want to do that. You'll meet a bunch of cool people. You might get like you might like produce something cool out of it. And then you just realize it's not for you, and then you move on to the next best thing. So I think that like um, yeah, just being active like that is a good way of getting bioengineering or any other field.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for the advice, and thank you again for agreeing to do this interview, and taking up 30 minutes out of your very busy 1L schedule. Um, so thank you.
No problem, no problem. I'm happy to help.
All right, well, you have a good night, and yeah, good luck for everything.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you.